What's going on, man? How's stuff going?
It's going, man. It's I don't know, feeling just generally in life very happy, but rushed all the time and hurried and like no time for anything. And between Santa Claus stuff and trying to send this class home, and general woodcock opener yesterday. Trying to do everything I want to do and everything I have to do never seems to jive the way I'd like it to.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely feel that, and I feel like I have far less responsibility than you do, but still feel that way.
I mean, honestly, it's one kid. I watch my friends with like four kids and the organized chaos they all live in, and they all make it work. So I guess I got nothing to bitch
Is
about.
it like dogs though? Like one dog doesn't feel like a lot, two dogs doesn't feel like a lot. That third dog felt like a lot of dogs, and then now four is like now you're back to pairs, and it doesn't really feel that bad. And then when we had that dog Toad here, it was five, and that was a pain in the ass. It's just like
Yeah, and I mean, it's just like my chores run. So I guess here's the thing: as I start recognizing, is like I'm on my first kid, and it's not like dogs, where it's like when I was 6 years into dogs, I was pretty competent. Like the correlation between my kid's age and my level of competence as a parent is like inverse. Like the older he gets, the worse I get at it, and I feel out of sorts with it. But like I said, I got buddies with just a little gang of kids everywhere, and they get to the place where they just understand like you need to just let go
yeah,
and let the kids just raise themselves to some degree. And I think that's what I need to learn. I think we're all suffering from the affect of like modern parenting, where as much as I know intellectually that I need to like let the kid experience the world, I'm still hovering. It's weird.
yeah.
So,
You gotta
which
you
I
got you're fussing with them too much. There's probably an analog there to or like a lesson that we could apply to dogs to that too.
Yeah,
I think the other thing too is that you have a very long like when you think about working with dogs, your cycle's very short.
yeah,
Like even if it's your dog and you have them for a long time, like their development kind of mentally and emotionally sort of stops at a certain point, and then like you've taught everything you need to, and then you just kind of coast for the rest of the time, which is probably the issue that a lot of people have with comparing their new dog to their last dog, is because they forget all the work that they did for like the first 3 years, and then they
yes.
just got to be cool for the rest of that dog's life, and then when the next one comes, they're like, this one is not like the last one, and you have to tell them, no, your last one was like this too for the first, number of years. You just,
I think if I got a 90-day workup, like I could get this kid doing a swim by. But my problem is I just exist in the mess with him every
yeah,
day.
yeah, yeah. Or, I think maybe you just got to strap an e-collar to them, and then you'd see a lot of stuff
Yeah,
clean up real fast.
yeah. Things definitely
We
change.
could
I
have
mean,
a conversation about that
I've
too.
got an analog e-collar.
There's a lot of noise going on about e-collars lately too that I'm hearing. Some
Really?
some veterinary organization just put out a stance, I think, like a pro stance for them,
Cool.
and then
Good.
another one like reiterated or put out they're against it. So now we have two veterinary organizations that are beefing over that, I guess is what it sounds like.
I mean, I feel the same way about the veterinary industry that I do about the state of politics.
Yeah,
You know, it's worthless.
I can't
I
trust
mean,
anything
other
you
than
say because it's always feels like it's motivated by something other than just like ethics.
you're either practicing the pharmacological side or the surgical side, or you have no business talking about it,
Yeah,
right? And so that's anything they put out on behavior is I find worthless.
well, that was one of the things, like when as soon as somebody talks to me about going to visit a veterinary behaviorist, my question is always, show me one program that states as part of their curriculum that they explore punishment
Yeah.
like practically, instead of
Yes.
just having a conversation about how it's bad. And so then you can kind of tell that if they teach operant conditioning, but then they do not want to use part of that,
Yeah. Of
even though they'll tell you that like the studies show that the efficacy of it,
course.
then you're dead in the water there.
Well, even academia, right, has been tainted by ideology when it comes to behavioral sciences now. And so it's, it's like the ABA. I've tried to dig into their stuff. I took an interest in that, and it's kind of a similar deal. Obviously, you have to have ethical parameters to things, and probably what we get away with as dog trainers, we couldn't get away with as, behavioral specialist with kids. But, either way, punishment's punishment, reinforcement's reinforcement. None of it changes because of your ideology.
Right. Right. Yeah. All right. So one of the things that you posted about recently that I wanted to ask you about today was you're working with a lab that you're trying to teach to point, but he's not from pointing lines. And so there was commentary on that post that you made. Some guy was asking, kind of just asking about, I don't know, whether you thought it was going to work or something. And my initial thought was they teach all sorts of dogs passive indications and detection work all the time. And that's kind of right. If you're not going to have, if you had no elicited point, you could still potentially teach that behavior, right? So that behavior to as a discriminate response to odor. But I wanted to hear from you about your thoughts on those two different things, since you have experience doing both, right? Working with detection dogs and then doing this stuff with labs. And then before that, just your personal opinion on what you think about pointing labs in general. And I think that I know kind of where you sit with that, because you're a very pragmatic hunting person. Like I've heard you say before, if you have a dog that's supposed to be a pointer and it doesn't point, but it still wants to hunt, then like maybe just hunt the dog the way that it likes to hunt, and then you'll be okay. Right. But then I know I have friends that would say, uh, uh, like stalling on a flush would be a fault in a retriever or a flusher.
In a
I could,
flusher.
like most things, I could argue either way just for the sake of arguing.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I think it's an interesting question. It's an interesting thing to explore. Um, and you'd have to. So I'm going to try to organize my thoughts around this. Interesting enough, somebody that I really enjoy following, and I just very casually from afar, never met them, but have looked at their content for years. And I have no idea whose name it is. I'm sure it's somebody of repute, and I'm sorry that I can't tie a name to their Instagram handle, but it's Alder Fork English Setters, and I think they're kind of tied in with the West method to some degree. But they posted just before this on that particular post and said, and I'll be bastardizing this quote because it's a Bill West quote, but give me a dog that likes birds enough, and I can teach it to point. And I didn't even take the time to process that, but I thought, that's interesting, and I like it. But until you talked about just now, tied it into passive indications and detection work. And absolutely, I mean, like especially if you look in Europe, and right now they're getting popular on the West Coast, but you're seeing a lot more spaniels in detection work these days. And like it's a pure fault and considered a genetic fault to have a soft flush in a spaniel, right? But you can absolutely put a passive alert on a spaniel. And I think one of the things that really, as I transitioned out of detection work as a full-time job into gun dog training as a full-time job, my interest was most heavy at that time in pointing dogs. And I think the correlation between the passive alert and detection work and the point, because I saw it as that when we were training the labs, I was like, we're just teaching them to point.
Right.
Essentially. And so, yeah, it's interesting. And so, yeah, I think there's probably something to what Alder Fork English Setter said there. Like, you give me a dog with enough desire for the item, the resource, whether it be a Kong or a bird or whatever, and I can teach it a passive indication. Now, whether or not that's practical from a hunting perspective is a different question. And so I do think that you're going to get some nature in there. And like, if you expose any dog, and I think spaniels included, to enough good flushing birds in the right environments, you're going to soften their flush. So if you look at most of your top spaniel trainers out there, when they're training for trial work, like when I watch these guys, and I watch a lot of YouTube videos of other people training to kind of figure out what it is they do, those dogs are all, I have not seen one that uses hard flushing birds every time. They're going to cripple a bird. They're going to clip wings. They're going to do whatever. But those dogs need to be catching birds on the ground.
Yeah,
maintain a
you want
whole
to
flush.
create that belief that every bird that they encounter is capturable by the dog
Yes,
if you want to create that hard flush.
exactly.
Right.
And so I think, yeah, I mean, I think as long as you allow, like, hey, if you don't pause and extend duration in this state, then you're going to lose your item. You get this kind of the pure negative punishment effect. It's like you're in the feedback loop, and if you make the next move, the resource is gone. But if you hold tight, somehow I intervene and the resource becomes yours
Right.
to some degree,
Right.
right? Or you're stimulated by it. And this is another thing with you could kind of get in with pointing dogs and like really, really pointy dogs that are trial. When I think of like a pointer that trials a lot, like there is absolutely something to just standing and watching a bird fly away. It's obviously reinforcing enough to those dogs
Yeah.
to stay in the game, right? Because from the positive reinforcement angle on trial pointers, there's not a whole lot that they get access to, right? Especially once they're broke. So it all interesting questions. I'm not sure if I answered it. I guess from the pragmatic approach, though, yeah, I want to let the dog do what it does. And most of the labs I've worked with, because I do much more upland, I enjoy upland hunting to a degree that's above my duck hunting. So I tend to, just spend more practical. I spend probably more time training technical retrieval work and more time hunting, flushing birds,
Hmm.
if that makes sense. And so I just kind of let the dogs do what they do. And with, with the one dog I've had the most experience hunting with being my pet house pet, she developed a soft flush because I was using her to flush for pointing dogs I was breaking out
Yeah.
because I saw value in that. And what was happening is because I'm using relatively good birds, as she went in for the flush, they fly away. And so her flush got softer and softer and softer as time went on to the point where she was flash pointing at least. And then it was taking me effort to be like, get the bird up, get the bird up, But what I kind of realized is like, if I just kick her around the farm, she trails her pheasants really nicely until they either pin or she decides to get them up. And if it's a quail, she's going to angle in on it and point, and I can usually coax her into trying to grab it off the ground. And if I think she's going to be a little too aggressive based on the vibe I have when she's near the bird, I just whistle sit her until I'm prepared for the shot, and then I let her go.
Hmm.
And I never know exactly how it's going to work out. Some days she just decides to extend that point more than I would like her to, and some days she gets in there and flushes the bird. But it
Yeah.
works every time.
We talked about that last time too. Is like the whole point of most of your training and handling is so that you can, well, most the point of most of the training is so that you can handle your dog in those scenarios to kind of get the outcome that you want. Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like you're only touching them at those points in time where you need to kind of get that outcome. So
Yeah,
that's
and it's
good.
like, and what's and the older I get, I feel like the more pragmatic I get. And it's like, and this is one thing that really appeals to me about the Munsties, is like I see them in a way that I think the versatile breeds, at least in this country, have been co-opted by bird hunters
Hmm.
in a way they're not maybe on the continent. I don't know. I've never been to the continent, but the Munsties, I don't know. The community kind of carries this vibe, or at least you do, and you're my real window into that community, which is like we're out here to hunt whatever moves, and if I pull the trigger on it, it's game. You
Yeah, I
know.
think I don't know. I don't know how much everybody feels that way. I definitely feel that way. We hunt a lot with a lady named Bobby Carney, who is kind of like our mentor in breeding. She's been hunting for a long time. I think she started with like labs when she was growing up hunting, and then at some point transitioned to the Munsterlanders. So she feels that way. I know a lot of guys that do upland birds and waterfowl, but don't really spend a lot of time hunting furred game. So I think there's more there's a lot of there are a bunch of people that have these dogs that mostly still kind of fit into that. I guess I would say like NAVDA style or like North American style of versatile dog hunting, right? Which is like their idea of versatility is birds on land and water and not the furred game part, maybe not necessarily the blood tracking, but there are a lot of people that do those things. I think when you look at in Germany, at least what I've heard, I've never been there and I haven't spent a ton of time talking to people about it, but a lot of our club members, both in like the Dratar Club and the Munsterlander Club, have said that in Germany they really don't worry about the pointing a whole lot. They kind of focus on all the other training, a lot of the tracking and game recovery. They use these dogs a lot to drive big game
Yep.
out
Pigs and
for the
stags and
gun,
yeah.
yeah. And then they teach the dogs to point. Like there for them, the pointing is a very obedience based thing, and I think you see in the breeding decisions that people make in the U.S. because we do hunt upland game more and we kind of hunt them differently. That I think you see that breeders making decisions where they're looking for dogs with a lot more point just because of how we hunt.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah, and I think it's I find that to be a bit of a shame, to be perfectly honest with you, because I think like practically it's I think it may be selecting against some of the traits that make them so interesting,
yeah,
right? And I think that one of the things I like about labs is like they haven't really been selectively bred for any of the upland work. So kind of what you get is what you get,
yeah.
you know? And
This is why the standardized testing that we use though for our breed certification I think helps guard against that, because there is still enough of that work in those tests where, like, if everybody that had a KLM, one of our dogs, only hunted upland game and waterfowl, like upland birds and waterfowl, that'd be fine because they're still going to run them on a rabbit track in their puppy test. So like we're still evaluating for that, and if as a breeder to like be successful, you still have to do enough of that that you're preserving the natural ability and the inclination to want to hunt those things, I think. But I get your point and I agree with you. And we just bred Aura through TCI with a dog from Germany that we imported semen. And I'm still talking to people on the phone who are submitting applications. And it's a conversation that's come up a bunch where when I'm talking to guys and they only hunt upland birds or they only hunt waterfowl, I'm kind of
yeah,
trying to steer them somewhere else,
yeah,
because for us that really is a thing that we want to see from them is I think that there's going to be areas of friction between the handler and the dog if they don't use the versatility, because that means that it's going to come out in places where they don't really want it to. And like the dogs are certainly capable of it, but I just don't feel great about like selling a Munsterlander to the setter guy who's like, I just want to try something different. You know what I mean?
I have a client with a Munster that I'd really like for you. You may not particularly like the dog, but I really enjoy the dog and I enjoy hunting with this guy. And the guy's he's just a cool dude that only wanted to hunt with his dog. And so we spent like a lot of time together. And I'll say this too, like I'm going to stop mentioning, I'm going to do my best. This is going to be very hard for me, but I'm going to do my best to just stop talking about specific methods and talk about styles, right? And just stop mentioning names of methods, not because I feel like it's unfair to the methods sometimes because I don't want to misrepresent them, and and also like I'm kind I'll get back to this point that I'm about to make, but I think thinking in terms of methods is unhelpful a lot of times, and I want to think in broader terms. But systems we used, and the systems that I used primarily when this dog came in, it was like it just wasn't really that effective.
Mm-hmm.
Like managing his chase on the flush and stuff like that. He just had some flush to him. He's a very aggressive dog, like extremely hard charging, hard Munstie, tough dog. But I went woodcock hunting with this guy, and like, dude, we flew bird. Like this dog was a heat-seeking missile for woodcock. He pretty much stayed under the gun, even though I would say this guy had a mediocre handle on his dog. Like the dog kind of, you could see that the dog kind of understood, like, I'm here to produce birds for the gun because that gets me the sequence I want. And yeah, like you're going to go into a cover. And if I took one of my Brittany's in there, it would kind of be one of those hunts where it was almost frustrating because I was going to have to, the cover was ultra thick. It was going to be really hard for me to go produce a bird for that dog, not get great shots on the birds. Um, and it was going to be a slower hunt. And it's like with two guns out there, this dog's just destroying cover. He is giving you enough time. You kind of hear the bell go silent. You get in position. It's almost like he knew he was pushing a bird to you. We got a lot of shots on that dog, off of that dog that day. And like from a practical perspective, he just did wonderful work, and it really was a turning point for me where I was like, why do you want anything different? Like if what you're out here to do is kill birds, you're not going to get a better look than this, most
Yeah.
times.
I think they're intelligent enough in my experience too that you can hunt them different ways and different things. And I think we talked about that before too. Like I will send them into heavy cover after pheasants or Gambel's quail or something like that to basically say like, hey, get them out of here. And
Hmm.
then whether I'm shooting birds that I basically ask them to go flush or root out, or I'm just doing that to get them out of that cover so I can see where they go, and then we go get nice points on singles and doubles and things. We hunt them like that a lot, and I think it takes some time to work all those things out. But I mean, it just speaks to the way that they're used in Europe more, I guess, right? Where they are used to drive game out of cover, and they can still point and do all
Yeah.
those other things.
And I don't know, I think there's a lot of beauty to that contextually, but I think it would be, it's like, because what you're doing and what somebody that says, okay, when I take you to this open field and you find a planted quail, I want you to look like a pointing dog and act like a pointing dog and do that. And then when I put you in this thick brush and we know we've got something on the move or you're chasing it, and then transitionally, woodcock pose different. They're kind of like a hybrid. They're going to be in really dense cover, but they're going to hold tight. And so it's like, but for you, you're going to give that dog enough tools from a communication perspective that you can tell them what's expected of them in that situation and probably get what you want. That said, like if your objective was just to be a hunter, like the dog kind of is going to give you what you're looking for if you are consistent in your approach to the way you hunt.
Yeah, because the reinforcement then is just naturally going to be consistent
Yes.
with what you want.
And that to me, there's a lot of beauty in what I would call meat dog work that people think, especially people that are new to this stuff, they're told what their expectation should be. And I think a lot of times it kind of robs them of the freedom to just go let nature do its thing and have fun with it.
Yes. I
Right.
agree. And I would say the longer that I do this and the more time I spend with my own dogs, I'll train them to these high level
Yes.
standards in these
And hunt them
organizations.
like a meat hunter.
And we'll go like we just visit that place for the time that we
Yeah.
need to, but I hunt
Yeah.
my dogs like meat dogs. I do
Yeah.
not ask my dogs to stand through shot and fall when we're hunting
Yeah.
wild birds.
Yeah.
I don't I don't I don't really I don't find myself in a ton of scenarios the way that I'm typically hunting where my dogs are having to back a bunch. But I would and do require them to honor other dogs in situations where it's going to mess it up if they don't. But like if my buddy's dog is pointing a pheasant in like a hedgerow and my dog is 100 yards away out in the field, I'm letting that dog keep moving while this other
Yes.
dog's on point. I'm not expecting that dog to turn and then like stop being industrious just because they see this other dog standing still. And that's how I choose to
Sure.
do
And
that.
it's a horses for courses thing. Right. And to me, it is that. I mean, I think this is something that people getting into it and selecting their breeds need to make, educated. This level of education would help, which is if what you have in your mind's eye is a picture of a setter backing a pointer in a beautiful setting on quail or grouse, then that's the dog you need. But if what you have in your mind's eye is the dog you walk out into the back 40 with and just get critters up and knock them down, then a pointer or setter may be disappointing to you because it's not a rough shooting type of dog in that way, right?
Yeah.
It's a more refined, when I say rough shooting, it's not fair. It conjures images of British talk, right? But when I say rough shooting, I'm talking about I'm going to go out to a loblolly patch, and if a rabbit gets out, I'm shooting it. If quail get out, I'm going to shoot them, and I don't care if they're pointed beautifully. It's not a refined idea of a hunt. It's the slogan. So yeah, I mean, I think it helps, and I think Munsties really encapsulate a good meat dog in my brain. Now, not to say that they can't be trained to a high level. They are a trainer's dog as well. All of these dogs have to. And I would say that Munsties lend themselves to like technical training much more effectively than a pointer or setter for the most part. Pointers and setters, very instinctive types of dogs. They go quest really hard. They have a ton of independence, and they're going to do things very naturally that we can refine with communication over time. But why would we ask much more technically out of them?
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't want to say anything that offends anybody, but I
It's
find
pigeonholing. It's not fair, right? It's pigeonholing people into certain categories. But it's when we're on spectrums, I'm thinking of spectrums,
yeah.
right? There have been NAVDA VC setters, and there have been NAVDA VC Munsties, and they capable. Are you capable of doing it with either breed? Absolutely.
What I meant was is when I first got into this stuff and I'm trying to look for resources and I am looking at certain methods or certain trainers because they're kind of just generally regarded as very good or the best at what they do. But then when I look and it's like, but they have a dog that is kind of a specialist and it's designed for the game that they play, and then the game is kind of designed for that dog, and then
Mm-hmm.
they do a subset of the things that I want my dogs to do. Then you start realizing that some of the approach to that training is going to conflict with some other stuff that you're looking to have those dogs do. Like, I'm not going to take my 8-week old puppy and put them on a barrel with a collar around their neck and one around their belly and just kind of stand there and fly birds in front of them for my
Yeah.
dogs. I'm not going to
Yeah.
do that. But if my dog's whole like life and the work that they're going to do is go find birds and then stand and watch them fly away, and they're already kind of genetically inclined to do that, as you said earlier, like they finding the bird just for the sake of finding it and then being cool with standing and watching it fly away as the reinforcement, I guess, and then getting to go back and hunt again after that. Like, if that's what makes them happy, then that's fine, but that's not what makes my dogs happy. My dogs get pissed watching birds fly away. They don't enjoy that. They feel like it got away from them.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's it. And it's like there is something genetically wired into the dog that's less about the behavior and more about the what they're feeling. Right? There's a classical thing that's hardwired into this dog.
Yeah.
And I think maybe standing on a barrel for a pointer and watching a bird fly is doing something for it from a dopaminergic perspective that it doesn't do for a Muncie, right? And so, yeah, I mean, it's interesting, and of course, it's all speculative,
Yep.
but it's fun
Yeah.
to speculate on those kind of things.
And your phrase of like a trainer's dog, when I think of that, I think about these breeds that are more of a generalist that you can kind
Yes.
of shape them however you want. So when I think of those things, I think of Mals and I think of Labs, of course, probably as the two most prominent ones. But then I definitely feel like of the continental versatile hunting dog breeds, like these German dogs kind of fit that bill too. And I think
Yeah, and
that's what draws me.
there's a spectrum within them, right? Like, you have that like to me the Psalms part of the short hair deal,
Yeah.
right? It makes it more of a bird dog,
Yes.
which is cool, but it's also gonna make it a different animal than a Muncie, right? And so there's that spectrum that exists within this edge of the spectrum and whole. And I think, and I've thought about this a lot since I've started thinking about pointing labs. And I've always said this, I used to kind of a line I used to use that I probably should walk back a little bit, that like having a pointing line was like kissing your sister, right? It's like, but it's, the practicality of pointing is one thing, but it's very limited when in different environments. So it's like think of if I want to run a pointing dog, I want a independent dog that's questing big and far and then like holds game for me until I can get to it. Right? So I'm thinking of like lower, saturation of game, questing big, but when you think quail and grouse, like these kind of dogs, and then everything like the style and the aesthetic becomes a part of it. And so it's like if I'm hunting a pointing dog, I want the aesthetic to some degree. Now I love my little French Brittany's for woodcock because I feel like they kind of give me a little bit of both worlds, right? Like I need to get in some gnarly cover. they get in there with me. They're these little gremlins, but when when a good one goes on point, you still get the vibe. I don't get that from a pointing lab at all. I get nothing from to me personally, looking at a pointing dog or a pointing lab on point is not satisfying. And so it's like if you take that part out of it, the satisfaction of the aesthetic, then kind of like who cares if the point is practical or stylish? So to me, it's like if it all becomes about if you take the aesthetic away, then it becomes about practicality.
Yeah.
So I want that dog to flush too.
Yeah.
Because that's a much more practical way to shoot at it than for having me go in there and flush it. And then, and then I think of the things I really like about labs. It's like that it is the trainer's dog. And one of the things that to me makes them a trainer's dog is their kind of natural codependence and their engagement. And so they're kind of looking through you naturally to access the things in the broader environment that they find reinforcing. And so it's kind of like I kind of dig the part of taking a dog that doesn't really quest that well naturally and kind of showing it that it's a part of the game and that it's fun and watching that dog kind of develop independence as opposed to start from a place of independence. And so I think one of the dangers potentially of the pointing lab thing genetically is trying to turn them into bird dogs and losing the beauty of the trainer's dog that's in there, right? And so I don't know that that's a real danger, but in my thought experiment, it becomes one.
Yeah. No, I get all that. Yeah, that makes sense. You hold on one second. I want to pull up a reminder of the other stuff that I want to talk about. You said earlier in this conversation you were talking about a bird flying away and that being negative punishment. And that was my reminder that I was talking to Randall the other day, and he was talking about working with a dog that, and I described working with similar dogs in the past, where the dog is reinforced by watching a bird fly away. And so what he was saying is, typical advice is when he's check cording the bird into a scent cone, and then that dog acknowledges scent. We see that behavior change, and then they take one more step, and then the bird goes, right?
Yes.
And so that's typically what we're doing, where we're trying to use that bird as negative punishment. Oh, you moved more, you crowded the bird, and that means it goes away. So now you lose, right? That's how we typically use that. But he was saying with this dog, he kind of had to let that dog creep in until it decided to stand. And then that's when he would fly that bird. So the conversation I want to have is, Aura.
That's not just me today.
Is that when we're working with dogs, right? It's the dog's perception of these things that really matters. And in that case, what we would typically use the bird flying away as a negative punisher, meaning it goes away to punish the fact that the dog took that step.
Yes.
And then what Randall was doing was basically positively reinforcing. He was showing or adding the presence, the visual of that bird to reinforce the fact that the dog stood still, right? So
yes.
Can you think of other times where just first, like, what do you think about that? And then also, like, can you think of other examples where you've had to use this, where like this dog doesn't feel about this the way that I thought they would, so I had to kind of I used a particular scenario or reinforcer or punisher as something else?
Well, so this is a really, really good topic because I've never put the time and effort into kind of articulating my thoughts on it. And I've had the thoughts, but I've probably had them many different times and come up with slightly different variations of what my beliefs are around this. But it's cool because we just had the conversation about right? And so it's like in development, I've got a puppy pointer out in the field. It bumps a couple of birds, 3 to 5, and then all of a sudden it's the staunchest dog you ever saw in your life. Seen it happen, had dogs like this. The one Nick bred for me is not far off of this. He's going to have a little bit of cat play to him, which is interesting.
Right?
Possum,
which
yeah.
we saw you chase out of your quail recall pen the other day.
Yeah,
also.
Yeah, oh, different possum. Yeah. So at what point, I think there's a fundamental change for that type of dog that they're always, I think there's going to be the negative punishing effect to create staunchness. Once that dog has become staunch, what does the bird flying away mean? Especially if the dog doesn't like to exhibit a lot of chase, right? And so once a dog's staunch, especially one that's lacking in chase, what is happening when the bird flies away? And so absolutely, I think that whether we call, I don't, because it's only positive reinforcement if it's reinforcing a behavior, right? And so, but it can absolutely be something satisfying
Yeah.
without being tied to a behavior.
Yes.
And so I think Randall's onto something by jumping the gun on the cat and mouse thing, right? So I haven't thought that far into it. I don't think I've ever utilized that. I think I stepped into punishment prior to thinking of I'm going to beat him to the punch and show him the bird can fly before he does this thing, and therefore hopefully extinct the little cat play he's got going on. And so I really like that. And I think it's a very safe approach to that to at least start, but then you're going to have your contingencies in your head. What happens if now that kind of makes him want to jump the gun a little
Yeah.
more, right? And so I think a lot of it's going to have to do with chase and like whether he finds that part reinforcing. So, you know, with all that said, yes, absolutely. Like at some point, it's a negative punisher. And then negative punishment is something too. And I want to get to this because, and I know you've got this on your scale because we'll get back around to the thing you posted the other day. Like negative punishment, I've struggled with because, and it's really a thing Ellis said a long time ago when he said he in one of his videos that I've watched a million times said, "What's the opposite of reinforcement?" And everybody raises their hand and goes, "Punishment." And he goes, "No, it's lack of reinforcement."
Yeah.
Right. And so I think a lot of times when we get into this technical talk about working primarily in positive reinforcement and negative punishment, we either neglect non-reinforcement or we neglect negative punishment. We kind of aren't thinking about what, or maybe we're not thinking when we're struggling with which one is which and what scenarios. And I think you have to kind of put your brain in that place with that scenario with a pointing dog.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so if it's making the dog staunch, then it's a negative punisher. If it's not, then it's potentially a positive reinforcer or a non-punisher. I
Yeah,
guess.
this is the fuck around and find out part of dog training that I think a lot of
Yes.
people don't spend time like in between reps or at the end of a training session really reflecting on what happened, right? Like a
Yes.
common example that I use a lot is people when they're working on steadiness, like cooking their dog with an e-collar, but the dog just runs through it and gets the bird. And so they're like, no, well, I punished the pursuit or I corrected the dog for not standing still. And it's like, no, the dog still got what they wanted. And so this then is just basically a distraction that they've learned to work through. Like when we make statements about these things, the fact that you qualified at the beginning of all of this that something could be satisfying, but it's not reinforcing, right? I
Yes.
like it, but it's not affecting the frequency, strength, or likelihood of a particular targeted behavior that I'm
Yes.
working on. Is like that's an important thing for somebody to understand when they're working on this stuff. And so this is one of the most important things that I think any trainer, including people that are just training their own dogs, understand is it's not what you say it is, it's what the dog thinks it is.
That's it. 100%. And this gets into that. This really, I think, speaks to that talk of like the method talk. And something I've struggled with a lot because I don't necessarily disagree with it is, so often we get that the advice that's given to people with their first dog is to like find one method and stick to it. And I think the most important piece of advice anybody getting their first dog can be given is Socratically to say, what is your objective? Is it to make a gun dog practically, or is it to become somebody that can train their own gun dog? Right? Because if you're going to answer that in a way that is somebody that can train their own gun dog, then what you really need to do is expose yourself to more information, gain an academic understanding of certain things, and then go out and do deep practice. And then go from there. And understand that everything is the fuck around and find out. because nothing ever exists in a box the way we want it to in our methods.
Right, right. Yeah, for sure. And I think for me, I try to, when I'm talking to clients and they're trying to decide between doing private lessons or doing a board and train, that's my delineation for that is we can install a skill set and then we can teach you how to handle the dog using that skill set so that it meets your needs. And then you
Yes.
are kind of in that former category. But if we're doing private training, I'm trying to teach you to be a dog trainer and then you go home and
Yes.
do the dog training at home.
Yes.
And so trying to help them understand that. So I think that's a very
That's a great point, and I need to be better at expressing that because you get people that make those decisions based on certain things, and that really needs to be the only delineation.
it's usually price point is the decision
Yes.
that they're making, that's the key factor in that decision making for them. But what I try to help them understand is the only thing that I can do reasonably well is in a private format is present you with information and then teach you how it applies to your dog so that you can go use it in your everyday life and in the stuff that you want to do. But what I'm definitely not on the hook for is producing a result in 1 hour when we meet once
Yes.
a week or whatever, and I have no control over what happens outside of that time. So what I tell people is the only thing I can do is deliver information. If anything else above that happens in that lesson, you can consider that a cherry on top. It's icing on the cake. But
And unfortunately, it does. Sometimes, like those moments when the dog does something really nicely are counterproductive because that's the expectation from that point
yeah,
forward.
I go so far now in a lot of private lessons, I try not to touch a leash at all.
I've got to get better at these things
Yeah,
because I am so bad for it.
because it's too easy to just say, here, let me see it, and then
Yeah, yeah.
you go do
Which
a
is no.
thing and then it's not replicable by that person. So instead, I will say that the number of people, usually women but sometimes men, who cry at some point during a private session increased when I stopped taking leashes, because you spend a lot of your time saying, no, don't do that, no, don't do that, like your other right, that's not your right, that sort of stuff.
You got to be somebody like I'm not, I'm trying to distance. I'm trying to not like the big five personality thing
Yeah.
because of what it says about me personally. But it's like low in conscientiousness, high in agreeableness apparently is not a great combination. And yeah, so I've got to work on my disagreeability.
Then that's, I think, why it works for me is, I think most people, if you had to ask them, like, you say my name and they know me, the first character trait that's going to come out of their mouth is disagreeable, probably.
So I need more of
Yeah,
that, dude.
that is probably the first thing that is going to come out of their face. Are you familiar with he's a guy that does protection dogs, Grassroots Canine?
I'm not.
So
I've really done a terrible job of keeping up with that world
there's this
recently.
guy, I think his name's Mike. He's from Canada, I think. Light skinned black guy's got like huge dreads, and stuff. And so he has a podcast that's called Rooted that I've been watching a lot, and they do a video thing too. And I really like him because he's really pragmatic. He's got like the right amount of like sarcasm and
Yeah.
just like it's entertaining, and I think he's very informative and really good. He was talking the other day on one of his things about just trainers and their approaches, and the thing that he kind of talked about was there's real dog training and then there's like woke dog trainers, right? So there's
Yeah.
like the same thing that we have in politics and other places, that you have some people that are trying to get the work done, and then you have some people that are like sitting on some kind of idealism or something, regardless of what the actual outcomes are in those situations. And I kind of added, when I think about this, that if we think about the woke side, or the side where like you can fix everything with rewards and just ignoring bad behavior, and then you have what people would consider like balanced trainers, which I just think is good normal dog training,
Yes.
right? And then there's that other side where I've kind of complained about, like, for me it's mostly come from like the people that are like really rooted in like an old school kind of mentality where like we have to break dogs, and
Yes.
the dog is like, in principle I just believe that the dog is supposed to do this for me, and it doesn't
Yes.
really matter if there's anything in it for them or not. And for me, I just kind of said like they're kind of just abusers a little bit to some degree, right? Was that,
No,
that's
I
a
don't
loaded
really.
term, but
Yeah, I mean, I think of that, right? I mean, it's interesting you say it because I think we think of that, and I'm sorry to cut you off,
No, no, you're
but
good.
it's like this modern affect thing that's going on has always come down to like the abusers. We talk about that, the guys that need to like just impose their will on the dog. I don't think I've ever known any of those guys. Like, I don't think I've truly ever known one, because everybody I've been tied to that I would say was like really heavy in compulsion, primary primarily compulsive trainers, were still managing attitude to some degree. Like, it was, I mean, because if you're only existing in like compulsion, like it didn't pay to just have dogs be completely suppressed all the time.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's like they were either, for the most part, these guys were early protection trainers I knew, or early retriever trainers I knew. And I mean, the bird dog guys trained with an extremely heavy hand. But if at the end of the day, when they turned a dog loose, the dog didn't want to go hunt birds and find them and do the right things, then it didn't matter. Like, you can't compel a dog to hunt. Like, right? And so there's, so I think, especially in hunting dogs, probably the community that's taken the most heat for being the most heavy-handed or abusive. Again, it's a non-starter, because there's no such thing as a hunting dog that's in a suppressed state all the time. Uh,
Yeah, I think when I think of the people that come to mind for me, it's where the only thing that saves them from their dogs not looking suppressed all the time is they have good enough genetics that when they get them out in the field and on birds, that you see
yes,
them kick into drive and then not really have those problems. And so at that
yes.
point, I think that that
It's like they're working in spite of the
the
people as
right,
opposed
the
to because
trainer
of them.
gets credit, but really the
Yes.
dog is successful in spite of the training, not because of it, right? Or I
Yeah.
would say because of their genetics, not because of the training. The other
Yes.
thing that I would say is my this is a very soft line that I see, but like I see some guys that the way that they interact with the dog in training is very suppressive, and then it's like they have to come around and try to fun stuff up extra, or like act like a super nice guy to kind of try to bring the dog out of that. And for me, like I consider myself a very compulsive trainer, honestly.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
and for me, what I'm trying to do though is if I do have to hit a button on a collar, or I'm popping a prong collar, or whatever I'm doing to kind of punish or correct a dog physically, I want it to be set up so that two things. First is I don't have to feel like I have to apologize for it after the fact, because you knew what you were supposed to do and you knew you were wrong. So when I do hold you accountable, I don't feel bad. And I can just say, if you don't want that to happen again, then don't do that. And then the second thing is that I've prepared the dog well enough before that so that even if they're a dog that usually wouldn't be able to tolerate a certain amount of pressure, that frankly I kind of like toughened them up to the point where they can. And so for me, when I'm looking at those things, I think that's where you end up is you have like these ideologues on either side where it's like everything should be fun and enjoyable for the dog all the time, and I think that's just not real life for any creature on the planet. And then you have the other side where it's like you should bend to my will because that's just what you're supposed to do when you're a dog. And then I think in between there's people that just sort of recognize like everyone has to have a reason to buy into this and to be cooperative in what they're doing. And then also everybody that's involved in that relationship is not wrong sometimes when they check the behavior of the other being in that situation. Maybe, I
I
guess.
No, I agree 100%. But I think what I also see with that is that, just like in everything else in the world, we have an Overton window shift.
Say that again. The term.
We have a shift in the Overton window.
What is it? What is an Overton window?
So like so think of it in terms of politics. We have left and right. And as the pendulum swings, the window of what you see on the spectrum shifts with the pendulum,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
And so what happens is, like, I right now, I don't feel like I've changed, and I have. I've experienced a lot of personal change politically, and I think a lot of my contemporaries feel this way. There has been a time in my life where I was considered left of center. Now I'm pretty sure I would be considered right of center.
But your general opinions on things you don't feel like changed. It's
My general
that
opinions
that
haven't changed that.
that window
Yes,
moved.
that window moved,
Okay.
right? And so I think that same thing we've experienced that in dog training, because when you say a thing like, let me think about how you phrased it just now, where it's like the dog should bend to our will or cede to our, like, there's a part of me that still feels that way.
Yeah.
Like, that, yes, I don't mean it, but to say it now, there was a time when I was a kid where dogs had masters. That was a normal phrase. This was dog and master. That the term master now has so much baggage. Like, I think if you were to use that especially in the context of like a Facebook
You
argument with
get
a
canceled.
positive trainer,
Yeah.
you're gonna get canceled, right? But like, we also, like, to me, I'm missing a little bit of that perspective, because now there's nobody willing to use that language anymore for me to say that guy's a little farther than I like him to be, right? Because so yeah, I mean, I agree 100% in terms that, like, I don't want to be domineering, but I also want, to me, and I had this kind of conversation with somebody publicly online the other day, that, like, obedience to me carries the connotation of submission to authority.
This was the next thing I wanted to talk about. So it's like we're actually staying on track today. This is great.
And so, yeah, and like, what the term obedience, that's an Overton window shift,
Yes.
in my opinion, where, like, a guy, it's a British trainer, and he said, like, behavior and obedience aren't the same thing. Of course, they're not the same thing, but to try to break them into completely separate contexts, to me, is ridiculous. And so, what's happened is the term obedience now only means, when I say it, does it perform a behavior? When I give a cue
Yeah.
as opposed to a command,
Yeah.
because also the word command to me connotes some sort of authority and some sort of submission.
Which is why a lot of people use the word cue now instead of command.
Absolutely. And then it becomes a sissified fucking term, in my
Yes.
opinion. And I hate it. Right. And so if I give you a command, it carries the power of authority. If I give you a cue, it's just a prompt to do something that may get you a reward. Right. But doing purely reward based training, if you're existing in a reward based training paradigm only, in my opinion, you're not doing obedience.
Correct.
That's just my
No,
opinion.
I
And you're not
100%
doing.
agree with that. I think a couple things that you said that I just want to touch on before we go into that obedience and behavior conversation, because I do want to get to that if we have time, is in one of our other conversations, you talked about your relationship with the dog, kind of like you're a football coach for a kid, right? And it's
Yes.
like, I'm going to put you in situations that are hard for you. And then I am going to require you to do what I say that you're supposed to do. And then at some point, some of you are going to try to quit. And then in those situations, I kind of have to not really let there be an option to quit. And then I
Yes.
have to kind of show you that you are more capable than you think you are, even though that's going to be uncomfortable for you in the moment, right? But that's
Yes.
kind of part of like building a dog or building a person in that context. And so when I think of like, and I said in one of our other conversations, I was using like the term imposition of will as a
Yes.
part of training, which it is. And I think that this is the key distinction between dogs and people, is that I don't think that animals really get to have like the idea of consent the way we think about it with people, right? Is like some of this stuff, just maybe, well, also with a kid to some degree, is like, I'm going to make this decision for you because you're not capable of making
I'm
a good decision.
responsible
Yeah.
for your behavior.
Right.
I'm responsible for your comfort. I'm responsible for your resources, and I'm responsible for your actions.
Yes.
If you're my child or you're my dog,
And that's why
I got to make decisions for you.
it's why I've started trying to use the word stewardship when I'm talking about
Yes.
dogs, because I feel like that is, I think it touches some of these things that we're talking about without using a term like master. Like if I'm your steward, it means I'm going to do the thing that's good for you, even if it's not the thing that you like sometimes.
But I'm not just your handler. I'm not just your owner, and I'm
Yes.
not your master. I like that. I think it's a fair term that right now doesn't carry any baggage. You give it long enough, steward might take on the same meaning as master.
Yes. No, yeah, I agree. I agree. And I think that that balance there is the part that even within the quote unquote balance training community, there's still a lot of argument and infighting over, is like where you sit on that spectrum of like some people consider themselves balance trainers because they teach with a lot of rewards and they only ever use e-collars, like a very mild suggestion, low level stuff. And to me, you're just like one step on the inside of the same level of ineffectiveness as
Yes.
those other people that just don't use those tools at all. And then like what I try to tell people is I use those tools gently and in combination and in sequence with positive reinforcement so that one day I can put my foot in that dog's butt and not have them fall apart. But so like my intention from the start is to not be nice. It's to understand that I have to teach and like prepare the dog appropriately for this, but I understand full and well that on the other end there's going to be a time where I tell the dog to do something and the dog does this while looking me straight in the eyes, and then I have to have recourse there. And I need that to not be that's not a time where we're going to have a conversation and I'm trying to convince you. It just needs to be like, no, you were told to do this thing, you know how to do it, you were non-compliant, and I need to create a consequence that doesn't necessarily force you into compliance so much as it forces you to want to get back to compliance to resolve your problem, which is the other thing that I think I see a lot, is guys that use tools very compulsively, but they're doing all the work for the dog. And so
Yeah.
then like
Yeah.
that it's not even learning then. It's just like I'll get drug around regardless of what I want to do. And so it's like when I think about those tools and how I use them is early on I'm using them to teach, and then later on I'm trying to use enough pressure to force a choice, and I need the
Yes.
choice to break the way that I want it to break.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a wonderful point, regardless of whether you're talking any organism. The idea is that the organism performed the behavior
Yes.
of its own free volition, right? And you know, and I had a really interesting talk. You know, this goes back. I've mentioned this on my podcast before, but just one time, my dad and I went on a long road trip, got to talk about all this stuff for the first time, and he dropped a very insightful, just a little anecdote on me that was phrasing was, you know, it kind of hit me with a Socratic thing, and it was the first protozoa swim toward the light or away from the darkness, right? And I think you have to be thinking in terms of that. You know, when we talk about comfort and resource, all that's encapsulated in that one little anecdote, right? And it has to be like you said, that to me is exact. That hits the nail on the head for what's overly compulsive, what's overly suppressive, is if you're taking choice away from the animal.
Yeah, and I think what you just said, that statement about the protozoa moving towards the light or away from the darkness, is kind of the point in that article I shared with you that I wrote a while ago about
Yes,
like
yes.
operant conditioning being a wheel or a
Well,
spiral.
we're going to get to that. I'm not letting us get out of this before I just laud you and dress you in your in your.
I can't, I wish I was that bright, but I have to give credit to Linda, my mentor
I know.
Linda, right? Who
Yeah.
Linda came Lionheart Canine in Westminster, Maryland. So she was the one that told me first that like operant conditioning is a wheel. So basically, to make this as succinct as possible, when you think about a dog's doing something that they're not supposed to do, and then I put pressure on them to pressure them into a behavior I asked them to do, I
Yes.
am
And then that
both,
behind.
I'm negatively reinforcing, right? I'm forcing them to comply, but I am also kind of punishing whatever they were doing beforehand. And
Of
so
course.
we just use pressure to get them out of something I find undesirable and into something that I want them to do, I find desirable. And then once they're there, that pressure turns off. So that would be negative reinforcement. And then I can pay them with something where they get some other sort of outcome that they find desirable, which is a reward, until they are non-compliant and we enter this loop again, right? And so
Yeah.
when I think of dogs, this would be my piece where I added maybe to what she told me. I think of dogs as technology, as like organic technology. My degree is in information systems, so I think in computers and database stuff and programming languages. And so to me, the way I think of this is like that's a loop that we enter, like a computer program. And then I have to have a period in time where there is a designator that says we now exit that loop. And then for me in that article, that was like a terminal marker, right? So I mark, and that lets the dog know, okay, this is the end of that behavior, and now something
We're
else.
flying right back into another loop.
command, right? Or I give you a new command and that starts the next thing or whatever the case may be. And so that's how I think about this particular thing, and just how I think about dogs in general is like you have your heart and you have your operating system, and that's kind of what's given to you. And if you piss and moan about that being too difficult to work with, then I think you bought the wrong computer to begin with. But then, assuming you like the hardware and operating system you got, then we can start programming them to do the specific things that you want them to do, understanding that the hardware and that operating system are never changing. So you still have to work within those confines, right?
Well, it's, first thing we got to do here is because we are shifting gears.
Okay.
You got to drop a link to that article.
I'll put it in the show notes for this one.
In the show notes of this.
Yeah.
So that article really, and I told you when I wrote you about it, I said it perfectly articulated something that's been on the tip of my tongue for a very long time. For a very long time. And it's something I've struggled with desperately. And so I've always had this image in my mind. So I was an anthropology major first. And so when I think it's very interesting, I think in terms of systems, but to me, I read a book on cybernetics, and to me, it's a systems deal. And it's a cybernetic feedback loop. And I've always described when I'm training a dog that I'm entering a cybernetic loop with the dog, where all we're doing is passing information back and forth. The more refined I want to make that, when I'm trying to get specific with it, then that makes the perfect sense. And if we're only training, and the thing that made this article work for me is I even asked you this in a conversation, I can't remember, when we were in person with each other. And I think I said, do you feel like you can exist? We're talking about 4 basic quadrants that somehow manage to create so much stress for all of us, but that you can exist in positive punishment without somehow dipping into negative reinforcement. And I think your answer to me was yes, you can. And there's this thing that to me that there's this inexorable link between positive punishment and negative reinforcement, which is intuitive. Completely everybody I think understands that, that's been after this for a while. And positive reinforcement and negative punishment are linked in a way that the other two aren't with each other, with themselves. Your description of those as two different systems, and thinking in that way, and then allowing that to become the wheel, or that is the wheel, right? Is the explanation of systems and methods, all systems. And I don't care which method you're talking about. If it's a balanced method, that describes it.
Yeah. And so just again, because I like to give credit to people where I hear
I
this stuff.
understand.
So like that idea of the wheel came from Linda. And then this idea of, instead of thinking about like positive and negative reinforcement, both being like reinforcement, and that's its category. And then there's 2 types of punishment, and punishment is a category. The way
Yes.
Napopo, right, as Bart and Michael Bellin teach it, is that you have a system that is comfort, discomfort, and then you have a system that is like gain and loss. My stupid camera. I talk with my hands. I need to not have like the camera that uses gestural commands, right? So we have comfort and discomfort as opposing forces, and we have gain and loss of reward as opposing forces. And so that way, when we're looking at this, I just think that the way that I described it was empathetic, right? So I'm putting myself in the dog's shoes, right? It was empathetic instead of being like observational from a third party perspective, right? So like what I'm saying is the dog experiences pressure and release, and I think they would combine those 2 things together, right? And then the dog experiences, I have a thing that I like and I lost it. And those
Yes.
things are like, I just think it's a more practical way to look at that. And so what that means is positive punishment and negative reinforcement generally in training are happening not necessarily at the same time, but so coupled together that you can't separate them, right?
Yes.
So like if my dog is not doing what they're supposed to, they're non-compliant, and I pressure them to return to compliance, I also punished the non-compliant behavior.
That was my point.
To some degree. But when we were talking and I said, can you isolate positive punishment by itself? And I said, yes. And that what I meant is that particularly if I use a marker, a conditioned punishment marker, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. If I punish a behavior and then I sort of leave a vacuum of information for the dog where I I'm not they don't escape that pressure into a specific behavior, but they just need to exit the behavior that caused the punishment to occur, then you are isolating positive punishment. And Pat Stewart, who's a trainer in Australia that has a really good podcast, Canine Paradigm, he makes a point when he's instructing that if he applies punishment to a dog and sees that the dog behaviorally does the same thing in response to that punishment, like more than once, he'll make the dog not do that just to make sure that the dog doesn't interpret that pressure as negative reinforcement.
Of
Like if
course.
the dog
Yeah.
takes a dirty bite and he stims the dog and that dog lays down and that happens more than once, he's going to make a
Yes.
point to make that not happen so the dog doesn't think I'm supposed to down when I feel pressure in this context.
Well, and I think the way I'm thinking of it, I think there's just a little distance between our thinking, which makes perfect sense when you consider the fact that you're a CIT guy and that I was an anthropology major.
Yeah.
Like this is that, I'm thinking in terms of when I negatively reinforce a behavior that I'm simultaneously punishing any other potential behavior, right? If I'm precise, which I agree, you're not saying anything far off of that. And then the same, it holds true that if I'm positively punishing, a specific behavior, I'm negatively reinforcing into whatever the end state happens to be. Right. And so that it's sloppy. It's just pure semantics at this point. But I like semantics.
Yes.
I hate the fact that the term semantics has been co-opted in a way to make things interpreted as meaningless. Because
It's used mostly in a dismissive fashion now.
Yes.
Right? And
yes.
This is where long time ago, like what was the impetus of these conversations we're having now was our talk on your podcast where
Yes.
I was trying to sell you on Gary Wilkes. And so here's another pitch for this is that he examines these sorts of things and like the language in his blog very often. So when he talks about punishment, he does use that term often. I mean, he'll discuss the fact that it can have different meanings, right? Just like you talked about obedience and how it has a different meaning to you than what it seems to generally mean in the dog training space now. Right.
Yeah.
But so like what he talks about punishment is like punishment does a couple things, right? Other than like decreasing the frequency, intensity, likelihood of a particular behavior, he said the effect of punishment generally is to create an inhibition for that behavior. But then some features, not side effects, and now I'm paraphrasing, of punishment are also that it tends to create suppression across a broad spectrum of behavior. So when I punish a dog, I usually don't just get stop doing that. What I often get, especially if I'm using a level of punishment that's really going to create an inhibition for that behavior, is what I tend to get is that like pouty sort of sucking up behavior, right? Is I get suppression of other things. Like often when I go into a house and I'm conditioning a punishment marker, I'm doing that in advance of then presenting a trigger to the dog that's going to cause them to do something punishable. Very often they don't do the thing that they would have very predictably done prior to that. And that's because they're in a suppressed state due to that punishment, which is why sometimes an effective way to use punishment is to punish the dog before you even enter the situation where you expect to find something happening, right? So like you punish the dog for nothing, but what you were trying to do basically was they're humming at an 8 on the arousal level already, and you punish them for no other reason than to bring them to a 2 before you brought them into that scenario.
I wouldn't even call that punishment. I would just call that non-contingent suppression, right? Like, I mean, we're again semantic at that point, but I think one thing I always try to do, and I always describe this when I'm dealing in especially pet stuff with people, is like we punish behaviors, not dogs. Right. And if we think of it, but then also once you begin to see predictive cues from the dog.
Dude, this is going so good today. I'm so pumped about this conversation because
that used to be the thing, right? Extinguish the fuse, not the explosion.
Right. Perish the thought, perish the deed. Right. And so you'll hear other trainers that typically lean on that. They would call themselves like they're behavior modification trainers, not like obedience trainers,
Yes.
a lot of them would say, like, we don't punish dogs or we don't correct dogs for like mistakes in obedience. But what we will punish is an inappropriate mind state that the dog is in. And then what they're effectively talking about is what they're really doing is they're using behavioral indicators. When I say behavior, I mean what the dog is doing that are
Yes.
indicative of a certain mental state or arousal, and then they're punishing that to bring the dog down an arousal level, and then they can go take them into a situation and work them successfully, right? So like now I've put you in a mental space where you're able to think more clearly and you're not overstimulated in a way where it's going to cause trouble. This, by the way, I think I'm going to try to like dovetail a whole bunch of stuff into this, is when I hear like the Hunt Smith folks, they'll talk about a dog licking their lips and flicking their tongue, and they'll say like he's ready to learn. To me, what
Yeah.
that means is the dog is a little bit suppressed and is providing these behavioral cues that lets me know that they're not in such an intense state of arousal, that they're capable of processing.
Yeah. I mean, like, that one has always elicited a little giggle from me, right? Because I'm just like, oh, you mean you made the dog nervous?
Right.
Good job.
Right. Which is the same thing for like the obstacle courses, by the way. Is like
Sure.
we put the dog in a place where they're experiencing a persistent level of some mild emotional discomfort there because
Yes.
they're like on a balance board or something like that. And then that makes it easier to do this other stuff that you're doing with them. And then over time, you see that is no longer novel. And so when you see like they get comfortable with that. So what happened was I made them mentally uncomfortable so I could teach them some skills, and then the novelty wore off. So now they look comfortable and the skills
Beautiful.
remain, right?
Beautiful. Yeah, because and I always talk about that as teaching them to chew gum and walk at the same time.
Yes. And so
Right.
my point with that is that there's no magic to that. So everybody that like does that without understanding how it works is, if you, my thing is always is like, if you understand principles, you'll never be a slave to technique. So if you understand that's what's happening, then you can apply that. You don't have to build an obstacle course in your backyard. You can figure that stuff out a lot of different ways,
You
right?
just introduce novelty anywhere.
But the other part I want to go back to is you called like me punishing a dog in advance of taking them into a situation to work. You called it like non-contingent. I don't remember what
Non-contingent
non-contingent
suppression.
suppression, which sounds a lot like non-contingent punishment, which is where a lot of people would say is where you get learned helplessness from. And I would argue that you can use that non-contingent punishment, and then if you immediately enter a situation where you're now able, the way I describe this to clients is, if your dog's not giving me a window of opportunity to teach them something, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to smash a hole in that wall where I need the window to be, like the
Yeah.
Kool-Aid man, and then we're going
Yeah.
to teach that thing. So I will use punishment if I need to create that suppression proactively so that the dog enters a scenario a little more careful. And
Yes.
then I usually end up being able to now reward them for a behavior that I was absolutely not going to get if I didn't suppress them in advance.
And I think this is easy to think of in terms of, especially like pet work, when what we're dealing in, and try to not overcomplicate this, right? I mean, if we're doing this thing we're talking about in conjunction with purposefully elicited higher states of drive and arousal, then we're drifting the car,
Yes.
like we talked about in our last. If we're doing this in the context of a problematic behavior pet case, then instead of being the football coach drifting the car, we're now sending that kid to boarding school, right? And that's a different, because this dog, there's no requirement other than to act right.
Bart calls this, some dogs you need to teach them how to play rock and roll. And then some dogs already know how to play rock and roll, so we need to teach them church music. That's the
Yes,
way he
yes,
says this. And I would
yeah,
say you can even use your drifting analogy as like, sometimes I'm bringing the dog up in drive because it's conducive to the lesson that I'm trying to teach. And then
even with
other
a
times
pet
I
dog.
need to step on the brake because if I hit this turn too hot, we're going to wipe out. And so
Absolutely.
this is, again, for me, this is all still on the same continuum. It's not that
Yes,
it's not one thing or the other. It's just how much, we talked about this last time, season to taste. And like sometimes if I'm starting with a dog that is way too hot, we got to pour some water on that just to be able to do anything.
That's fair. Yeah, yeah, I mean, it's all these analogies and metaphors are
They
beautiful,
work, right?
right? And I hope they're helping people get to what we're coming to, which is, yeah, I mean, it's like this is why, to me, the absurdity of the purely positive movement is it's like you're making soup without liquid.
Yeah.
We're talking about seasoning to taste. Like you're just not accounting for the fact that this thing that exists, whether you want it to or not, is happening.
Yes.
And it's like you can't reward your way to suppression.
Yes.
And if that's what you need, you got to add water.
Right. Yeah. No, I think all this stuff works, right? Is like, I like the cooking analogy for this stuff because there's an appropriate level of seasoning that might be different for each person. And then we also have like, there's a component of heat, and then there's like how much, and also for how long do I have to do this? Right.
Yeah.
So I think like all that stuff works. So I think what I want to touch on now is this, you mentioned it, this post that was about obedience is not behavior. And so this was a place where I think me and you, are kind of on the same page with like words have meaning.
Yes.
So and part of the trouble with the English language is that a word can have many meanings.
Yes.
But what we definitely don't need to do is add new ones that don't fucking exist. and then try to start confusing everybody that way. So my opinion of this is behavior is what a dog does, right? Behavior is observable, like physical action. And so if we were to say obedience is not behavior, that's wrong. I would say obedience is a subset of behavior if we look at it only as a cue and response, right? Is that obedience is behavior. Obedience is discriminate behavior, which means that a particular cue or signal motivates a particular behavior. So for me, obedience at that point is a classically conditioned response to a particular signal. But this is where obedience is more than just
it's not synonymous with behavior, right? So I think that's one thing we have to, when we're talking wordplay, which is the thing that really gets me excited, right? Is like the word obedience is not the word behavior.
Right.
They have two different meanings.
Right.
Right. And what do we mean? It's like you said, now let's give as concise, and we got to do it within the context of dog training.
Yes.
Right. And so this is the problem. And so for me, I want to give those words within the context of dog training the most clear and concise meaning they can possibly have. Behavior is an organism's response to its environment. That's it. Obedience, now, if you go in the dictionary, you got to go down 2 or 3 to get to one that makes the most sense within the context to dog training. And to me, it deals with submission to authority.
Yes.
Right? Because it's not just stimulus and response, which behavior is essentially. And so, once you separate those two things, now you got to deal in, is the way a dog is acting, is the behavior a dog is doing, is it tied to any sort of emotional state? And so this gets us to, when we talk obedience and behavior, it is classical operant.
Yes. And so a couple things about that. I think where dog trainers nowadays use the word obedience is they are just talking about a subset of environmental stimulus that like triggers certain behaviors in the dog.
Which is what the guy's point was in the first place. And so I kind of shit on his parade, but to me, it's just the wordplay.
Yeah.
Again,
right.
It's like,
but the piece that's missing is this idea of a certain degree of submission to authority, which I think is the component that does get missed in obedience, the use of that term and the teaching of the skills in dog training a lot now, is that you have to have that. If we don't get to the point where the dog does it, even if they don't want to, which is how I would like very casually sort of describe, willingly does it because you told them to, even though they would rather do something else, maybe is a better way to say it.
Well, you said, and I'm sorry, I know I'm stepping on it because there's little points. It's just the images in your head. When you talk to somebody that's into dogs and you say obedience, and then just say the word obey, and just, it's purely cognate, right? Like, it's, and so that to me, I now step back out, but that's what I want people to do, is to get out of their dog trainer head and into word head.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that that's the piece that's missing a lot, is really what it just comes down to, is the current way that obedience gets framed. I think is why in dog training is why two things. First, people don't have they have like kind of obedience, but they don't really have very reliable behavior, right? I think that's the first problem that comes from this. And then the second piece is it's why there's this delineation between obedience and behavior modification, because if you've already determined that obedience is basically just a dog doing tricks on cue, then of course it's not going to have any role in modifying a dog's behavior. The way I think about this practically, again, and this is where the language gets in the way sometimes, is I do think about everything as behavior, and I don't really think about anything as obedience in the way that people delineate it now. What I mean by that is the commands that I give a dog, or the visual cues that come from the environment, the scent cues that come from the environment, the auditory cues that come from the environment, anything the dog can perceive that motivates behavior is all the same to me. And it's just like we're going to manipulate those things based on outcomes, in if we're going to frame this in operant conditioning, so that the dog does something in response to their environment, and then they receive a consequence that they either find desirable or undesirable that informs their choice the next time. And we have to recognize that there is an emotional piece to this too,
That's the part.
that part gets missed a lot, right? And
Well, we need to separate these things to describe them. And this is like that. I don't like the term BMod. I don't like it. I don't like it in psychology, because it's like, is the problem that the kid hit somebody, or is it the kid's walking around in a state of rage all the
well,
time?
here's the other problem with it though, is that every trainer that I know that talks about BMod, including the guy that wrote that post,
Yeah.
somewhere in there he didn't say what I'm going to say exactly, but he's talked about like timing, and he talked about all these other things that the handler needs. And what that means is the handler is very involved in the entire scenario, that's what's predicated on this change in behavior. And so then I think we shouldn't call it BMod, we should call it EMod, because they modified the environment.
Yes.
And so once you modify the environment, if you're doing any level of management, which is
You're
always,
only in management.
it's part of any training plan. But if you're avoiding things, if you are altering distance away from a trigger, if you are moving to a different environment, or if I have to be involved, like the dog's behavior is heavily predicated on my presence, then to me that's not, I didn't modify their behavior. I modified the environment, which created a change in behavior. And this is an important distinction for me, because the way I look at this stuff is I don't think I really did my job in those situations unless I don't have to be involved. What I want is you take an existing scenario, and then you you do your training, and then the only variable that changed was that the training occurred. So like if the behavior happens when I'm not there and the solution is predicated on my presence, then I didn't fix the problem.
And that holds up for whether we're talking about a dog barking at the door, chewing on baseboards, or pointing a bird.
Yeah, it's why the argument between whether you say whoa or not is like, it depends. So I teach people whoa. I teach whoa as like, there I do have a command there. It's an obedience behavior, meaning I will use it at certain times. I say it and I expect the dog to submit, to obey what I'm telling them to do. That is a completely different context. And the functional purpose of that, by the way, is to be able to stop the dog when I need to stop the dog, and I am present. But in the context of field work, I'm not woeing dogs into points, because in the scenario where I would need the dog to stop, I'm probably not around that dog because I'm like 2 hills back or something, right? Like the dog needs to stand there. And so the trigger there is the bird. It's not me, or it's the bird flushing. It's not me. So the
Well, it
signals,
also allows us. it does allow us the opportunity, and this is where you're right, and this is, if I can get what I need here and I give the dog the opportunity to learn the same behavior from the different perspective. Like if the dog's running the bird up, running the bird up, running the bird up, and it never begins to understand that it can also have its resource. You teach it through, and this is what I loved about your article, and this brings us full circle, is you broke it down into comfort versus resource. Like your two different systems of training. One's about resources, the other one's about comfort. If I can teach you to do this thing in the comfort system, then I can allow you to learn the same thing in the reinforcement or in the resource system.
Yes.
And the resource system is the one that holds up in the field away from.
That's great. That's great, because the way that this practically works most of the time, if the training's done well, is you do inject yourself into the situation. You have to get the
Yes.
training done, and then you have to remove yourself from that scenario. And that's the part that was missing for me from that article. Is I go to that guy, and he's probably a fantastic trainer, and we're arguing.
I'm sure I would agree with the guy. I mean, he's obviously in the problem is it's still in the ideological war.
Yes.
And so it's like, what I don't like is I'm expected to be on your side when you say some shit I disagree with because I'm on your same ideological team.
The guy on the other podcast that I mentioned earlier, that Rooted podcast, he mentioned, this is one of the things he said, and that is like, when you're a dog trainer, you have to recognize that like you're going to agree with a lot of somebody says, but not everything, and like you have to be okay with that. That's a big part of this, right? But the thing, what I did was, after I read that post, I went to that guy's page and I looked at his training videos. And one of the first things that I pulled up was it was like a group class, and it was a bunch of handlers handling their dogs, and every dog from the collar around the dog's neck, which was pretty much 100%, I think, a prong collar, which is neither here nor there, but I just do think it's a detail that matters to some degree, right? Is that from the collar to the owner's hand was this much leash. That was good for dramatic effect, but it was.
That's why I got the giggle.
So
yeah, no.
So my thing is, like, even if I agree with most of what you're saying, what I see from your clients in the video that you presented to me is those dogs can't make decisions. They're so heavily controlled, and then the equipment that they're using is like, I'm still kind of also under, because I can't think of a better way to say it, like threat of recourse if I step out of line. Then for me, that's not trained. And my background for this comes from my time in Keeler Method. In Keeler Method, before we're allowed to start working on off-leash stuff, you do the string test. There is a single loop of sewing thread that connects your leash to the dog's chain collar. And if you can't heel them, sit them, down them, recall them, do all that without breaking that piece of thread, you don't get to do off-leash work. And the whole idea there is you have removed your influence as much as you can before you transition
and
to
still
distance,
be physically tethered.
Right?
Yes. I agree 100%. And
and then it's also why, by the way, when people talk about dogs being off leash, and I'm guilty of this too, because it's marketing language now. If you have an e-collar on your dog, that dog is not off leash.
I like that. It's beautiful. And I'm going to start using it on a regular basis. I've never considered it. I've never thought about it because of obvious reasons. But yes, you're 100% correct.
So that's the other part, the kind of the principle that you stand on if you're going to be a Keeler Method trainer, and you're going to kind of use the language that they use, is like Tony would say a lot, no batteries required, when he would talk about off leash work. And so his point was
purely mechanical analog.
The dog is actually off leash. We are going to train this dog to a place where they cannot be influenced by the handler directly. The handler cannot exert pressure on the dog. And then when you say that, there's still, obviously, if you're present, then there's some amount of pressure you're exerting on the dog. Your presence implies certain things. But my point is like, I can't push a button to immediately change the dog's mind.
Yeah, I mean, it's not obedience in my brain until you are unable to physically influence the dog with a reinforcer or a punisher.
And that's
Like, and the dog is
and
compliant.
the way the dog and the way Tony has said this in the past is a dog that is trained with an e-collar, there's still the question, is that dog obedient to, he would probably still say master, but like, is the dog obedient to the owner, or is the dog obedient to the tool? And
Yes.
so if the dog is obedient to the tool, then again, we've now changed the scenario for that owner. Is like, if I can't take that tool off and get the reliable behavior change, then I still haven't really modified behavior. I've modified the environment. So now there's a persistent threat of recourse, which is not the same thing as changing the dog's behavior. I'm saying all this to say, overwhelmingly, most of the stuff that most dog trainers are selling to me is bullshit. It's not
Yeah.
training if you define it that way. But
Yeah.
here's the other part: the market pressure has made that the standard now. And
I
I
agree.
find myself even landing there. My pet owners, they don't care about whether there's an e-collar on the dog or not. They care about their dog not running out in the street and being able to control them when they need to. So they're fine with a remote controlled dog.
Well, and on the other end of the spectrum, the highest level sport players that think of obedience as purely stimulus and response, potentially, not to pigeonhole everybody, right? Or good, purely positive type trainers are dealing in the same exact thing, which is like, what's sustainable? Like, unless I guarantee you your reinforcement rate at that level is unsustainable for just general lifestyle
That
obedience.
was an old head at a NAVTA training day said, like, when we're talking about training for the invitational, he said, we just go there to visit, but the dogs don't live there. Is what the
Yeah,
way he said it, right? Is like that
yeah,
level of training, that standard is like you meet it for a short period of time and then you leave. But in one of our older conversations, I think it was one of the podcasts we did with Nick on GDIY, I was talking about how you see these trainers that like they can put a PSA 3 on their dog, but off the field, their dog is reactive to other dogs, or they have to muzzle their dog at the vet. And this is at the core of this conversation about what obedience is or isn't.
yes.
And this happens a lot. My clients, I've had a number of my clients go to like an AKC obedience ring, go in and be in ribbons, they place, but when they walk out of that ring and they just put their dog in a downstay and then go walk off and talk to another one of my clients, some of these old ladies that train at the local obedience club freak out because dogs are supposed to be in crates outside of the ring and nobody's allowed to stand too close to the ring. And a lot of those dogs are blowing up, getting walked from the car into the ring. And then they have a beautiful performance in the ring, but they don't have any obedience outside of it. And so
Yes.
that's where this idea of obedience being performative rather than absolute kind of comes up. And you even see it in some of these guys that will take these really hard lines and they make these very like controversial or provocative statements about training. Is then I look at them and I'm like, you do the same thing. You're on the
Yes.
field and you're walking off with a trophy, but your dog goes straight from the field into a kennel because they're not trustworthy in these other environments because they're not obedient.
This is, I mean, you're hitting, this is so much of everything, dude. It's master hunters, it's PSA threes, it's purely positive dogs. It's like, what is it that you want? And it's what is in the mind's eye of that guy that's looking at all your ribbons and stuff saying, I want that. What he wants is that 100% of the time, not on the testing field or trial field, and that level of compliance without the effort that's required to sustain that over whatever period of time. And yeah, I mean, it's like good obedience should be effortless once it's acquired.
Yes.
And then I think that is where we're all trying to get to. And it's fine to play the games. I think it does say something about you as a trainer if you win and you do well and you have ribbons and everything else, but it doesn't say everything about you.
Yes. I agree.
And
It's very conflicting for me because I care about those standards a lot, because I don't think that there's a better way to be able to say objectively a trainer can or cannot train a dog, right?
yes,
But also, this is why when I talk about training, and we both do this like thing, companion gun dog thing, right? Where like we're teaching the dog the field work stuff, but then we're also trying to teach him to be a good house member, right? So like that's why when I talk about that part, I call it lifestyle training. And what I'm trying
Yes.
to delineate is like, I'm going to teach you skills that you can use to navigate new situations with your dog. I'll teach them things so they can go out and do the hunting stuff. But then there's this other skill set that is basically, in certain environments, I want the dogs to more or less just automatically know what they're supposed to do. And for
I
the
want
most
you to
part,
be an
that is leave me alone and be
obedient dog.
quiet, right? Or whatever.
Yes, like that's it. I mean, I think that's what I hope we can get back to. And I guess that's why I was so offended by this otherwise innocuous post that this guy made and that's on my team, right? It's just don't, the term obedience, I want it to mean what it means to me,
Yes.
to everybody, and to the community.
Yes.
And I think it's a very simple term that's meant something for a long period of time, and it compulsory language bothers me worse than anything else.
Yeah. Yeah.
That so that's it, and I guess that's the whole. But I thought, man, what a great conversation
Yeah.
to this
Yeah.
point. That was a good one.
Yeah. So yeah, I think we should probably just kill it there. It's not going to get
Because
better.
I'm catching myself starting to do the rambly thing.
Yeah.
Unless there's
No, I
anything else.
think this is why when I go to a training day, I just like the guy that has a VC, but he can't keep his dog from running up to other dogs or pissing on somebody else's truck. It bothers
Yes.
me. So
Me
like
too.
I
Me
just
too.
I don't, those are one of those places where I'm probably going to like try not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like maybe that person has some information that I need, but also I'm standing back and looking and being like, now why can't you apply all that same stuff to these other places just so your dog doesn't look like an asshole?
Here's one thing. I will give the protection sport crowd a pass on this because it's like, what is culture demand of the dog, right? And so, like, if it's a Malinois that is, breeding selection for people, number one, everything skews to the mean. So in breeding, we need the extremes. Those games exist for breeding, or supposedly exist for breeding. So, like, if you've got a dog that's incapable, if it's a sociopath, you can have a sociopathic dog in that game.
Yeah.
And it's okay.
Yeah.
You can't, in my opinion, have a sociopathic dog in our games. You shouldn't. Culture should demand you don't.
Yes.
And so, yeah, I agree 100%.
I agree with that too. And then that leads me, I want to have a conversation next time maybe about like handler aggression in gun
Yeah,
dogs and places where it's like absolutely not okay, and then other places where I think we have to have like a little bit more of a conversation, like resource guarding
I get
in
it.
certain
I see what you're saying.
situations, right?
I see what you're saying. Yeah, yeah. Like, I mean, we're going to get some of that through our genetic selection, and I think that is one because we can go another 2 hours
Yeah.
starting down that road.
And I do
It's a great-
also, you mentioned it the other time. I know he's probably really busy now, but I would like us to talk to Jake if there's some way to make
I'm
that
sure.
happen.
Yeah,
Where we
I'm going to send him this one.
okay.
And I guess if we're on our way out of this one, I didn't really have anything to address my patrons, but I've kind of gotten the habit of I'm not uploading the Companion Gun Dog podcast to the Companion Gun Dog podcast Patreon.
Sure.
But I have been uploading the Dog Trainer Confidential to the Companion Gun Dog podcast Patreon.
Do you have a thing
So
you want to talk about?
No, just a shout out to those guys and thank you for being members. And like, I enjoy this kind of discourse so much that I feel like it's of more value to them.
This has quickly become, and I said this when I was hanging out with like Nick and Randall and you also, like,
yeah.
I really look forward to these conversations. And it's even one, this is going to sound so narcissistic, but like I will go back and listen to these conversations after I release them. And man, I'm just smiling the whole time.
There's like little gems that I forget,
Yeah.
And I get the, it elicits the stuff in me. Like I said, that article did, and it stimulates me to want to do more, to think more, to train harder, so it's good for that. But then it, these little gems of things that help me organize things in my mind.
It makes self-reflection less uncomfortable also.
Yes.
Is like when I can talk through this, and this is a thing that I think a lot of people don't do in a lot of places where they're maybe talking about stuff that's a little controversial, is like we just keep our opinion to ourselves because we don't want to be offended or offend someone or get canceled or anything like that. But I think like self-reflection is really important, and it can't happen in an echo chamber. And so when we talk through this stuff, you'll say some things sometimes where I'm like, I think I need to soften my perspective on this. Or in some places, I think I've said things and I'm like, you know what? I'm only saying that because it's the PC thing to say. And like Grayson took a harder line on that, and I think he's right. And like that's a then it becomes like an integrity thing for me that I need to like shore up a little bit. So there's been some
I
of
think
that too.
we need to normalize normality
Yeah.
in all facets of life.
Yeah.
That's all doesn't mean that those that exist on the fringes are not useful members of society or the dog training community or whatever else. There needs to be room for everyone. But here in the middle, like, this is where most of us
It's
are.
important for people to know that the middle is very big, it's very wide, and it's most of us. Yeah.
And it's safe.
Yeah.
And we want everybody here, and I guess that's it. So to use woke language, come on in, the water's fine.
This is a
here
safe
in
space for all the
the safest
people in the middle.
The safest space on the planet is right here in the middle, man.
Go.
So
all right, Grayson,
awesome,
thank you so much.
Thank you, bud.
Yeah, man, take
care.
it easy.
Yeah.
Bye.